So we're going to talk about the miter saw, what it's for, what the parts are, and how to use it safely real quick. So the miter saw is used only for cutting across the grain and cutting our stock to however long we want it. We can make multiple of the same or whatever we want to do, but the idea is that if we have a piece with the grain running this way, we want to cut that into sections or a certain length, we're going to use our miter saw. Now, this one is actually mounted on a stand. It's got rollers, so it supports this whole, this is about 5 feet long. It'll support it on the end. We've got our arm that's spring-loaded that pulls down, and the guard comes out of the way, and I can make my cut. When I release the arm, that guard goes back in place and is protecting that blade so nothing can get in the way. We've got our table that we can actually turn to cut a miter. If we can take this at 15, 22 and a half, 31 and 0.62 degrees and 45s. Typically we're going to be at 0 degrees and 45 degrees right or left. So this will pivot, and then we've got the beds right here, right and left, where we're going to hold our material. We also have a fence here that we're going to push our material up against nice and tight. So when we make our cut, we're nice and safe. And then we have a throat plate here that the blade goes beyond and under for our cut. The maximum we can cut is about the length of this throat, which is about 8 inches. Anything 8 inches or narrower, we can cut with this. Anything 8 inches or wider, we're going to use our radial arm saw, and we can cut out, I think, about 12 inches of material across cut. If we need to go wider than that, we have other options. We can use a circular saw, something like that. But for most applications, this is going to be perfect for what we need to do. I'm going to try and make sure that this blade is consistent, so when you cut your stock, that when you cut this edge that you cut is 90 degrees to the back side and 90 degrees to the bottom side. We use this tool a lot, and so sometimes it gets out of whack, and so it'll be off a little bit this way, or it'll actually be off a little bit this way too. It'll be off sometimes horizontally or off vertically, or sometimes both. So I'll try and keep really consistent on it, but it is always a good idea to cut a scrap piece, get your miter gauge, make sure you're at 90, make sure you're 90 this way, and make sure you are 90 this way before you start working on your project, because what you don't want is cut a bunch of pieces and then you find out that that's not 90 degrees and now things aren't lining up, or you don't get that nice tight fit. To adjust this, if you want to put this at 45, all we do is pull this up, swing this over, and that will lock in place. If you want to go the other way, the other 45, that locks in place, and now we're set and ready to go. And now we can cut our miters at 45 degrees. So let's talk about how we're going to make our cut and how we're going to do it safely. When I've got my stock, again, I'm always going across the grain. I'm going to hold my stock tight against the fence. I never want my hand on the part of the table that turns. I know there's little symbols here that say no hands, but I need your hands at least 6 inches from where the blade comes down to the left and to the right, and that's 6 inches right here to the edge of where this circle is. So anything in here, that's fine. I'm going to hold it in here or hold it over here, but I'm not holding it in here. And we have some other ways to hold material if you need to. We can use clamps, we can use other devices, but if we're holding it with our hands, we need to hold it here. If you've got a really short piece that we need to chop off that's less than 6 inches, again, we have other ways to do that. But the piece that you're cutting has to be at least 12 inches long for us to use this. Otherwise, I need to go ahead and make that cut for you. When I make my cut, I'm going to pull my trigger. I'm going to bring this all the way through the material, holding it tight with my left hand. I'm going to let go of the trigger and wait till the blade comes to a complete stop, and then let this up. What that's going to do, it's going to keep me safe. It's also going to give me a nice finish where that cut is. I'm not going to have the blade coming up and scratching that or doing whatever. So it's a good habit to get into. Pull the trigger, come all the way through the piece, let off the trigger, wait till the blade stops, and then bring the blade back up. What you don't want to do also is that don't just let it go. There is a spring here that will retract it back up, but you guide it back up when you're done after that blade has stopped. Should you feel some binding or something sounds weird or something's not going through or the blade's acting up, Even if you're in the middle of the cut, just let the trigger go. It will come to a stop fairly quickly, and then we'll figure it out. Don't try and force it through or do something weird. If it doesn't seem right, if it doesn't smell right, if it doesn't look right, if it doesn't sound right, just let go of that trigger. And even if we don't finish the cut, we'll get that blade to stop, wait till it comes to a stop, and we'll bring it up and we'll see what's going on with your cut. If you're having a hard time, if this is not going through very easy, or you see a lot of burn marks on the edge here, let me know. That might mean that this is not set up right, or we just have a dull blade. I might need to change that out, but please kind of keep that in mind. Another thing before we start, we want to make sure that we are set up to where we want it. Make sure this is at 0, make sure it's locked in. We want to make sure there's no scrap pieces in the throat here or hanging out in the back here, because if it moves just from the vibration of the saw as we're cutting and it hits a blade, it's going to kick those scrap pieces all over the place, and we don't want that. So make sure this is all cleared out of the way and that we don't have anything that could potentially hit that blade. For the shop here, our minimum material thickness, I want at least 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. Any smaller than that, it can blow out, and that's not a good deal. So the first thing I want to do is, when I have my part rough cut, I always want it at least an inch wider than whatever my final size is going to be, because I need to cut off a little bit on each end to make sure that they are square. So what I'm going to do is bring this right here. I'm just going to trim off a little bit. I'm going to hold it nice and tight against the fence. If it's bowed, or if it's not sitting good against the turntable here or the table here, let me know and we can take care of it or clamp it some other way. But now we're ready to cut, and we're just going to cut a little bit off. So we're going to turn it on. Make sure we get our chips out of the way. Take our measurement of whatever that's going to be. Let's say it's 9 inches. Put a mark there. Take my square, and I'm going to take a line all the way across. Now, some miter saws are pretty fancy. They've got lasers, they've got shadow lines that will match up with this line. We're not getting fancy. We're just going to bring this down. I'm going to look at my tooth, and I'm going to get the tooth lined up on the side that I don't want. I don't want to go right down the center of that line. I don't want to have the tooth on this side of the line, because that will cause my piece to be too short. I'm going to bring this down and make sure my line is to the outside of the blade looking at the tooth. After that, I make sure I'm lined up. I'm going to bring the saw all the way up, turn it on. And make my cut. And you can see there, I'm right on my line. So when you are done with the saw, you've got a couple responsibilities. One, you need to make sure all these little chips that get caught back here or over here are out of the way. You made those chips, you get them out of the way for the next person so they don't have to deal with it. Number two, go ahead and pull the arm down, and there's a pin right there. You're just going to press that in, and now this is in the locked position. There's really nothing that can happen even when someone hits the trigger. Now the blade is buried in here, and this is how it should be stored when we're finished. So those two things, make sure your material is out of the way, make sure your chip's out of the way, and make sure this blade is in the down and locked position when you are done.